And we are live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're listening from. Welcome to yet another one of Chiromo Hospital Group live sessions. We are live on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and YouTube today, and we're here with a very interesting conversation. Actually, it's a follow-up conversation from last week's session where we had a discussion around unhealthy coping. So we had a few requests from the audience to follow this up with a session on positive coping, and here we are. So we're here with a beautiful panel. I'd like to give them a chance to say hi. I'll just follow the grid as it is from my end. Let me start with you, Monica, then Nassim, and then we'll finish with you, Ian. Over to you, Monica.
Thank you, Pendo. Hi, everyone. My name is Monica Musyoka. I'm a psychologist here at Chiromo Hospital Group, and I'm looking forward to today's session. Thank you.
Glad to have you here, Monica. Thank you for joining us. After Monica, you have Nassim.
Hi everyone, my name is Nassim Nkatha. I'm a psychologist and founder of HUGS organization, Hardiness and Earthquake Success, and I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you so much, Nassim, even for sparing time to join us today. We are glad to have you on board. After Nassim, we have Ian. Over to you, Ian.
Hi everyone, I'm Ian Kiplangat. I'm a psychologist here at Chiromo Hospital Group, and I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you so much for joining us, Ian, and for bringing balance to this conversation. We'd like to hear how both women and men cope through different life events. So thank you for joining us. I will be your host. My name is Pendo Ochola, and I'm here to make things interesting, and in addition to that, ensure that you have a conversation that fosters mental health awareness. So let's dive right into the conversation. Allow me to start with you, Ian, and that is on defining how you understand positive coping. When you hear the word positive coping, what comes first to your mind?
Positive coping, these are strategies or mechanisms, healthy strategies or mechanisms that we use to cope with or reduce or tolerate stress.
Okay. So these are positive mechanisms that help us reduce and tolerate stress. I want to throw my panel under the bus today, and this is because our conversations are here to create awareness about things as they are on the ground. I'll ask a random question. Let me start with Monica, Nassim, then Ian. Out of 100, how many times do you find yourself coping positively versus negatively? Is it like a 50-50, 80-30? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think, if I'm to be honest, right now, I would say I'm at a 70. I think when I look at my coping mechanisms now, I've improved compared to maybe a couple of years ago. So 70 healthy, maybe 30 unhealthy.
Okay. I like that. How about you, Nassim?
So to be honest, I'd say it depends. It varies with what's happening, whether I'm on my menses or not. So if I'm not on my menses, then I'm at an 80. If I'm on my menses, then I'm at a 40 or 50. So it varies depending on the situation.
Oh, I like that. I like how you're diversifying it. The other factors that actually come into play when it comes to positively coping. Thank you for that. How about Ian? How is yours playing right now?
Reflecting to back how it was before, I think there's been a lot of improvement, and now I'll give it 80-20.
80-20. Okay. I like that. I choose not to throw myself under the bus because I have the right not to. But I actually appreciate that you're able to share that to our audience. And the importance of this is for people to see that you could be aware of how to actually cope positive ways, but that doesn't guarantee, neither is it realistic to cope positively 100% of the times each and every day of the week. So to make this even more understandable to our audience, we want to look at some examples of positive coping. Let me start with you, Nassim. What are your go-to positive coping mechanisms?
So I have quite a few. So maybe I can mention my top two or top three. So first things, setting boundaries. But then again, you can't set boundaries if you don't have self-awareness. So for you to set boundaries, you really need to know what works for you, what doesn't work for you, when the line is being crossed and all that. So self-awareness is very important when it comes to coping mechanisms and also setting boundaries. The other one is I have something called a joy list. So I always create a joy list before a disaster happens. So with my joy list, I also know what works when, so it starts from simple things to major things, simple things like just sleeping to major things like taking a vacation and everything. So I know when I just need a nap and everything will be fine, and I know when I just need to unplug and take a vacation and just unplug from the world. So with that, it helps a lot. So those are my two go-to coping strategies for me. Yeah.
That is the J list. And the other one was, kindly remind me the first one?
Setting boundaries.
Setting boundaries. Okay. I like that because actually it's interesting that you've had several questions on these sessions about boundaries. And perhaps we'll organize a session dedicated to that. I hope we'll invite you to join, and respond further on that. But when it comes to setting boundaries, maybe we can explain just a little bit more, not to divert from the topic, but why it's important to set boundaries as part of positive coping.
For me, I believe setting boundaries is very, very important, not only as a coping mechanism, but it should also be part of our day-to-day, because again, there are certain things that we might be okay with, or there are certain things that might cause us stress or anxiety. And I know in the topic of setting boundaries is this common question that we normally get: what about if it's family members that are causing you distress and everything? How do you set boundaries with your family members and everything? But it's needed for your mental well-being. For me, I have this mantra that I go with, that if it's harmful for my mental health, then I'm not there for it. So you need to learn how to set healthy boundaries. And with that, you also need to know how to communicate this. Because again, communication is very key. How do you communicate your boundaries? How do you communicate when things are too much and you can't handle them? Because again, the way you communicate it, the other person may not understand it, or they may take it as you being rude or offensive and everything. And we don't want that. As much as you're setting boundaries, you also need to be considerate of the other person's feelings, of the other person's emotions, at the same time validating your own feelings and communicating how that thing doesn't, makes you feel or doesn't sit well with you. So when, like you said, it's a long conversation that needs to be had, but setting boundaries goes hand in hand with also communication skills. How well do you communicate? How well do you become assertive? Because again, there's this notion of when you're being assertive, then you're kind of being rude, but that's not what assertive means. It just means you standing up for your needs and wants while communicating it in a healthy way, in a respectful way to the other person. So that's what I'd say in a brief, boundaries are. I hope I've answered your question.
Certainly, yes. Thank you so much for elaborating that. And just as you've said, there's room for having a longer conversation about setting and communicating boundaries as part of coping, equally as part of our day-to-day lives. Let me go over to you, Monica. What would be your go-to coping mechanisms, positive coping mechanisms?
Okay. I would say one thing that has really worked for me in the recent, I would say, months, is spending time with people I feel I'm quite into my cup. So if I'm having a bad day, if I'm having a bad week, I'll identify like one or two people that I would set aside time to talk to them. And that has really helped me, not really like them giving me solutions, but just listening to me, having space for me or holding space for me. In our profession, you find that like you're always the person giving space or holding space for people. But it's really important to identify people in your life who can hold space for you when you're also struggling. And the other thing that works for me as well is exercise or just physical movement. And I like to incorporate that with spending time in nature. So I live here in Mombasa, and I like going to the beach. I like walking. I like swimming in the ocean. I think that also helps me kind of center myself, especially when I'm going through a hard time. And I would say my last one is journaling. Journaling helps me kind of process what's going on. Maybe I've been on autopilot or haven't had time to really sit down and think about what's going on. So at the end of the day or at the end of the week, I will sit down and really think about how I'm feeling, what has happened, my experiences for that week, and kind of like just decompress myself.
Mhm, mhm. I like that you said recenter, because there are a lot of times when we just find ourselves in a state of being on autopilot. Life is happening, things are moving, you're responding one or another, but not in a mindful way. And journaling allows you to process those thoughts and put them together to be more intentional in it. So I'm hearing mindfulness, I'm hearing interacting with the environment, but also your social capital. Let me hear from Ian as well. What are your go-to positive coping mechanisms?
Um, my main one, I have a very good social capital, proper support system. So whenever I know something is going on, I have people to talk to. Anytime, any day, they're willing to listen and sometimes give solutions. Also, I have a list of things I enjoy doing. Whenever I feel low, I can choose to take a walk or bask, which I do it very intentionally, listening to music. I keep a digital journal. Also, another thing that helps me to cope positively with situations is my spirituality. So, turning to a higher power I believe in.
Well, there you have it. To anyone who's listening to this conversation, sorry. The reason why we go through this is to try and paint a picture of how positive coping mechanisms look like. A lot of times when we say coping mechanism, it looks like this big thing that you have to probably do a short course for to understand how to actually do it or get a mentor, or, but you find that these are daily things that you can incorporate here and there, but generally they help you to cope with the normal life stresses. um, Connecting with a higher power, if that's your belief system, taking a walk, taking a swim, what you're eating, what music you're listening to, what boundaries you're setting, and all of this come together to create this positive system that you can turn to whenever you need to cope. So I want to come to you, Monica, about positive coping mechanisms. And there's a concept of a coping toolbox. And I'd like to hear from you, even based on your practice. What's your understanding of a coping toolbox, to make it more understandable to our audience? But in addition to that, how can we build one? Over to you, Monica.
Okay, so my understanding of a toolbox is basically a resource of things that you've identified or things that you've seen maybe have worked for you in the past or you would want to try out. So it's basically a list of resources or a list of things that you feel might be useful to you in times of need. And I like to, when I'm working with my clients, whenever we talk about coping, you can separate them into two. You can talk about coping that requires less energy. So I've had a tough day, I'm tired. Maybe exercising or doing something very physical might not work for me that day, but I can have less intensive coping mechanism or coping strategies for that day. So it's good to look at what it is that you're going through and what you actually need. Do I need rest? Do I need to decompress? Do I need to think about what is going on? Do I need a distraction? So I feel like a toolbox is just a list of things that can help, but also when you're using the toolbox, it's important to consider what it is that you're going through and what you need.
Mhm, mhm. Right. So this is a combination of you come up together with different coping mechanisms that would work at different points in time.
Yeah.
Just like a toolbox which has a spanner, a screwdriver, and the likes. Okay, if we are coming up with a positive coping toolbox, let me come over to you, Nassim. What are some of the things that you need to consider when putting together a positive coping toolbox?
So, like I mentioned first, you need to have a lot of self-awareness. How do you react to certain situations? If it's stress, how do you react to stress? What are your symptoms to stress? If it's anger, do you know your warning signs to anger right before you blow up or something? So, understanding all this, it helps you know what works for you at an exact time. Like I mentioned, most people do this thing of Googling. You go Google what works for anger, what works for depression, and then you try it out. But then again, you forget that these things are not necessarily universal in the sense that, yes, there are suggestions, but you need to know what works for you best and when. So before you do that, especially these things of breathing exercises, grounding techniques, and all that, you need to figure out, like Monica said, if you're having a hard day and exercise is not for you, maybe you might go to online and tell you need to exercise, and then you're there exercising and it's not working, it's not doing anything for you, and you're like, these coping mechanisms don't work. So for you, you need to really understand yourself and know what works for you at what exact moment. So this way, in that toolbox, you already know for stress, this is what I need to do. For anger, this is what I need to do. For, depression, PMDD, all those things, these are what I need to do in terms of, helping me and everything. So this way you already, I normally call it like coming up with a contingency plan of, those things of in case of emergency, break glass and everything. Having a list of such, it really helps when emergency comes because you already know what is working for you. You already know what is your go-to, and you already know if this doesn't work, then I have this to look into everything. So for me, I'll tell you the most important thing is that aspect of self-awareness. Do you know your symptoms? Do you know, your warning signs right before things get worse and everything? And then from there, you ask yourself, what would work for me in this particular moment? Because again, even when you look at symptoms, let's say for anxiety, there are certain people that get different symptoms as opposed to others, but the term is the same as anxiety. So for you to really understand your symptom, emotional symptoms, physical symptoms, how do you react? There's some people who can't breathe. There's some people for a split second, they lose touch of reality and everything. So those coping mechanisms are totally different and would work differently depending on your symptoms. So that is, for me, I would tell you that understand your symptoms, understand your warning signs right before the disaster happens, quote unquote, in terms of this the worst of the worst happens and everything. So this, it really guides you in terms of knowing what do you pull out of your toolbox. Because again, if you're having a puncture and you need to change your spare tire and everything, there's certain tools you can't use in your toolbox. So that is what I'd say, understanding
Mhm,
yourself.
mhm. Oh, I really like that. And one of the examples you used, I've had this a lot. I like that you're all psychologists, and I don't know if you've experienced the same thing. I've had several clients saying, this breathing thing doesn't work for me. I don't know if you've also had that in sessions. And it just contextualizes how it's a commonly known coping mechanism, but still there's a good number of people who struggle with that particular one. So we really need to understand what works for you. Breathing is not the only one, and I think it brings me to the next question. And I'd like to direct it to you, Ian. When it comes to this toolbox, do we have a limit of how many tools you can put in it, how many coping mechanisms you can put in it, or can we just go ham and have as many as possible? Over to you, Ian.
I don't think we are supposed to have a limit of coping mechanisms because stressors are part of life. We will experience stressors anytime, any day. And like Nassim said, there are some coping mechanisms you can't use in certain situations. So I think it is important to have as many as possible positive coping mechanisms just in case you encounter a stressor you have never encountered before and you might need to try out a new coping mechanism in the toolbox. So I don't think there's a limit.
Mhm, mhm. You can put as many, you can have as many as possible because you have as many stressors through life. So thank you for clarifying that. I'd like to come back to you, Monica, and this is to now bring together the conversation of where coping mechanisms and mental health in the larger part, how these two come together. What is the link between the coping mechanisms we pick, in this case being positive coping mechanisms, and our mental well-being?
Okay. I think one of the biggest benefits of having coping mechanisms is resilience. Like if I have strategies, if I have mechanisms, if I have ways to cope with difficult moments or difficult experiences, that means by the end of that difficult experience, I'm not as affected as I would have been if I didn't have healthy coping mechanisms. So it's not really coping mechanisms are to cope. They don't really prevent things from happening. So at the end of the day, if you have a healthy way of coping, you end up able to cope with things later on. Like when this last happened, I did this and that, and that worked for me. So the next time something similar or something totally different happens, you have a way of dealing with it, and it's easier to bounce back. It is easier to continue with life amidst difficulties. I think the other major thing about coping mechanisms, it reduces stress. Like if I've had a bad day, I listen to music or exercise or whatever it is that is in your toolbox, you do that. You find yourself feeling a bit more relaxed or a bit more in control of what's going on. So the overall stress that you're under is mitigated, and therefore you reduce the impact of the stress that you're going through, and also the possibility of having other mental health issues. So reducing the possibility of having depression or anxiety because of the things that you're going through. So generally, it just makes you a lot healthier mentally.
No, thank you so much for that. Nessa, would you like to add on the same? How positive coping mechanisms impact on our mental well-being?
Mhm. So maybe what I can, everything Monica said is true, and I wouldn't, change anything in that. Just to add to it, it's just like coping mechanism help you have a cushion. You can land safely. When you see kids jumping in a bounce house, they're not worried about getting hurt and everything because they know there's something fluffy and cushiony to hold them. So for you, you're prepared to face any situation in life. So you don't get scared. There's this sort of fear that comes with uncertainty. That I don't know what will happen next and everything. But for you, you already have a toolbox, so you're ready to face on, life or situation as they come. So there's that aspect of cushioning that comes with it, and there's that aspect of reduced stress, in the situation, because I know what I can do that will help me out, immediately, or will give me some sort of relief to it. But there's something I would want to add to the definition of positive coping mechanism. They are tools or mechanism that we use in a stressful situation. The emphasis on that doesn't lead to harm later on in life, or in the long term it doesn't lead to harm, because there's a lot of coping mechanisms that people have that offer you some soft or basic or impromptu relief, but the long term it causes you harm later on. So I felt like that is something that I needed to highlight on in terms of the definition of.
Mhm. Oh, thank you so much for that. From what I hear from both of your responses is that they help us to first of all build resilience, gain a little bit of control of our day-to-day life experiences. But in addition to that, there's that confidence to approach even difficult situations because you have systems in place. I like that you highlighted the bit on it does not lead to some form of harm later on. And there's a question that came up in our last conversation: is it possible for a positive coping mechanism to turn into a negative coping mechanism? And the panel is in agreement to that. You would pick running as a coping mechanism, which is certainly positive, but if it comes over your going to work, it changes your feeding habits to an unhealthy degree. You lose body mass to a point that it's risky. You see how a positive coping mechanism can also morph into a negative coping mechanism. So that bit on in a way that doesn't cause harm is a very important clause to add. And thank you, Nasim, for highlighting that. Ian, I'd like to put a bit of a span in the works and the same question about how our positive coping impacts on our mental health. I'd like to flip it. Can our mental health affect our execution of positive coping mechanisms?
Yes, I think at some point our mental health can affect our the positive coping mechanisms we've built over time. For example, if one is depressed, one of the symptoms is losing interest in things they enjoyed doing. So let's say, for example, in your positive coping toolbox, you are very intentional with self-care, basking, taking walks, spending time with family, and then depression comes in and you don't have the motivation to leave the house, you isolate, you know. So sometimes our mental health can affect the positive mechanisms we've built over time. And sometimes we might find ourselves now getting into the negative ways of coping until we talk to maybe a professional and we come back on track.
Thank you so much for that response. Again, we're having these conversations to speak of experiences as they are on the ground. And the reality is, as much as we would like to ideally have these coping mechanisms working 24/7, there are times when our mental health can also impact on the execution of the positive coping mechanisms. Monica, if I'm to follow up on Ian's comments, in the event that you find that your mental health is having that effect on your positive coping mechanisms, what can one do?
So we talked about how the toolbox should be diverse. So I feel like if you notice that you're not practicing some of the routine coping mechanism, like you routinely exercise, you routinely meet up with people, then it's identifying the toolbox, the things that are in the toolbox that have um, the aspect of helping you emotionally or helping you address the symptoms that you're experiencing. So if I'm feeling low, I look for something in the toolbox that would improve my moods. But then also Ian talked about this, the fact that that is actually a symptom of the illness itself. So if someone is struggling with depression and they notice that they've not been doing the things that they want to do or they usually like doing, that would be a point for them to either seek out professional help. Sometimes it's not just you figuring out things on your own. Sometimes asking for help is part of coping. It's not something aside of coping. So asking for help, reaching out to people, talking to people sometimes can help you find the way forward. It's not just that you need to figure it out on your own. So I think the asking for help is really important, but also trying to find other things that maybe are less intensive or don't require a lot of energy, something that you feel that you can do in the meantime.
Thank you so much for that. And it emphasizes on the aspect of diversifying your toolbox. And thank you for clarifying that even seeking help, going for therapy is part of positive coping. Just to wrap that up together, I'd like someone, either of you, to briefly explain the concept of behavior activation in a way of, do I say, promoting coping mechanisms, even when you're really struggling to maintain positive coping mechanisms. I don't know who would like to take that.
I think I can start off and then yes. So your question was in regards to behavior activation, right? So for you to it's actually a type of therapy that we normally use at the end, of therapy. We've worked on triggers, we've worked on all this. You already know how you react to certain situations. So now we start activating new behavior in terms of what we've dealt with. It's mostly on CBT aspect of things. So I feel like it really helps, because I'll give real life situations. Most people, let's say you gave an example of running, you'll realize maybe one of the coping mechanisms that someone used to do when they would get low is maybe go for a run. They would even time it in terms of kilometers they've done, their heart rates and all that, and then they realize this time when they're maybe depressed and everything, they can't run as much as they used to. They're taking longer, they're getting tired easily and everything. And the problem that this person does is they start comparing themselves with what they could have done a few months ago, a few weeks ago, and everything. And that does more harm than good. So, under behavior activation is understanding that you're in a different capacity, in a different situations, physically, psychologically, emotionally. So you can't be at your prime in terms of the pace that you're taking, in terms of the kilometers that you're going for and everything. So by just doing that, it really helps. And also gratitude. When I talk about gratitude, people think that gratitude needs to be big things. You need to be grateful for huge things and everything. You can be grateful for small things, and this also helps boost your behavior in terms of your psych. Let me not use the term psych, but also let me not use the term behavior, but psych. That motivation to do things, because now you can see at least something is working out for me. You woke up, you're healthy, the weather looks good and everything. Be grateful for that. You don't need to be grateful for big things. You don't need to wait for big things to happen for you to be grateful for them. So what I would say is the best thing to behavior motivation is being kind to yourself. Talking positively to yourself, encouraging yourself, being your own motivation and everything, and stop comparing yourself to a time that you were in your prime and everything, because that comparison also hurts a lot in terms of your mood, in terms of your energy to do certain things that you need to do to work on yourself. So I feel like that is one of the key components when it comes to behavior activation. First of all, understanding what needs to be done and being kind to yourself in terms of being patient with the process and how you're improving on yourself. I hope that answered it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I was just making a joke the other day. I read somewhere that if you're supposed to go to the gym and you wake up that day and you don't have the motivation to go to the gym, just grab your bag, change into your gym attire, and even try and walk to the gym door and go back home. At least you did something. And chances are is that it's going to actually give you the psych, as you said, the psych to carry on with that activity. So even the simplest of activities could psych you up for the next. And that's a principle that you want to always remember. So thank you for clarifying that, Nasim. We're coming towards the end of the conversation, and I would like to present one more question to the panel. There are skills that we do on a daily basis that might not seem useful, but in the long run might actually have benefits. Let me start with you, Monica. What are some of these skills, and how does this concept even apply?
Okay. I think when you talk about things that we do out of routine, maybe you have a way of doing things. Maybe let me give an example. I feel like what we've been talking about is coping in a consistent way, but then it only takes a couple of stressors or a couple of things going wrong, and you notice that you're not doing it anymore. But then when you stop doing things that are good for you, the consequences compound. So if I stop eating 3 meals a day and I start eating two, I stop sleeping for 8 hours, I start sleeping for 3 or 4. This compounding effect now is what actually brings out the mental health issues or the mental health disorders. So it's only in the absence of good coping that you see the benefit of it sometimes. So it's really good to remain consistent. I feel like this is something that is underrated. Also, patience. Sometimes you might start out a coping mechanism and it doesn't work. Maybe it's journaling. You find yourself journaling maybe once every in a while. And then when something bad happens, you don't journal at all. I feel like maybe just the consistency is really important, but patience as well. Just because something hasn't worked this time round or it didn't stick this time round doesn't mean that you can't try it at a later point. The other thing I think is also emotional intelligence. When you think about underrated skills, knowing yourself, Nassim has talked about self awareness a lot, and I feel like self awareness is one of the things that people don't consider as a big thing, but it is. It takes you noticing yourself first. Most of the time, by the time someone else notices that something is wrong, it's later at a later point when you are self-aware. When you check in on yourself, it's easier to see that your patterns of behavior are changing, your patterns of thinking are changing. So it's really important to be your first priority, practicing self-care first, and then it's easier to just see a difference and kind of now look for what to do or look for the way forward after that. So I think emotional intelligence, patience, and consistency are things that really go a long way.
Thank you so much for that. When you're talking about consistency, I don't know why my mind went all the way back to when I was in school, primary school, high school, and there were very strict. There's a very strict structure on when you're supposed to wake up, go for break, watch lessons, PE time, and all of that. And in hindsight, I'm realizing that this routine was a very important part in structuring life. And to even say in high school, you had to do your bed before you go to class. And sometimes you'd wonder, what is this thing about having to make bed? But as life goes on, you realize that it sets you up for the day. You practice discipline and things like that. I mean, it seems very mundane, very insignificant, but in the end of the day, it plays a very important role on how you go through things. I don't know, from the rest of the panel, are there any other skills that you feel like are there in the present that you do on a day-to-day basis that might end up having long-term benefits, in addition to what Monica has said? Let me follow my the grid as it is. Let me start with Ian and then we'll finish with Ian.
I don't think there is anything more to add on top of what Monica has said. But just to talk about patience as being one of them, sometimes for positive coping mechanisms, you can't get instant results like negative coping mechanisms. So with patience, you are able to get long-term positive results. Same thing with consistency. I think just like Monica put it, I can't add anything more on top of that.
Thank you for that. Instant results. I think that's one of the things that differentiate positive from negative coping mechanisms. And in that case, you need to practice patience. Thank you for that, Ian. Finally, over to you, Nassim.
I'm not sure if it's a skill per se, but for me, I consider it as a skill. The aspect of knowing what's in your control, that understanding your circle of control, because most of the time, some of the things that worry us or weigh heavy on us are things that are totally out of our control. So just stressing over it or focusing on it does more harm as good, because at the end of the day you'll stress over it and there's nothing much you can do about it. So just understanding that concept of what is in my control and what is out of my control helps you know what things to focus on and what things not to focus on. And over time, that is one of the things that has brought me so much peace. As much as, yes, it doesn't feel good that it has happened, at the end of the day, it gives me that peace of there's nothing much I could have done about it. So there's no need for me to dwell on it or focus much on it, because again, I can't do anything about it. And then focusing on things that you can control, there's that aspect of it gives you that sense of control. There's something that you can do about it and everything. So just to add to what Monica said, understanding your three circles, those are your circle of control, concern, and influence, does good. It's a very good skill to have when it comes to positive coping.
Wow. Thank you so much, Nasim, for highlighting that. And there we have it. To anyone who is watching this conversation, thank you so much for following through. I'm also seeing interactions. Please feel free to ask any questions that you may have regarding positive coping, and we will make sure to respond to them. Feel free to DM us or even comment down below this video. I want to take this time to give a chance to panelists to give the parting shot with regards to positive coping, and then we'll have brought this conversation to an end. So I'll still follow my grid. Let me start with you, Monica, and then we'll go to Nassim and finally Ian. Over to you, Monica.
Okay. I think the most important thing to me is compassion. I feel like sometimes when you're not coping really well, you can be really hard on yourself. Feeling like you're not doing the right things, feeling like um, you're not a good person sometimes, especially if you find yourself practicing more of the unhealthy coping mechanisms. It's all about breaking the cycle, and a lot of that requires compassion, being kind to yourself, giving yourself what you need. And I think the other thing would be, um, I when it comes to asking for help, not being afraid of asking for help. Just because you're struggling does not make you less than. So whether you're a therapist, whether you are someone who helps out other people, whether you're a parent, you're supposed to be taking care of your kids. When you're struggling, ask for help. That's part of positive coping. I think that would be it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica, for that. We thank you so much for your insights all through the conversation. We're glad to have you as a panelist, and we'd like to have you even more. Let me come over to you, Nassim. Now, what would be your parting shot with regards to coping mechanisms?
I'll just maybe repeat what Monica said, but differently. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself and be patient, because I feel like most of the time it's so easy for us to always recoil back to what is wrong with me, how silly am I, why would I do this. I normally say the best aid you can ever give to yourself is ask yourself, if my best friend was going through this, what would I tell them? Because high chances are you'd be way kinder to your best friend as you would be to yourself. So learn how to be kind to yourself, as much as it may seem hard and everything. Just be kind with yourself, and also be patient. Just because you've started working on something doesn't mean you need to find that instant results with it and everything. Just be patient and be diverse. Like we said, your toolbox needs to be very diverse with different things that would help out and everything. And again, I'll repeat, don't feel ashamed to ask for help. I know most of the time it looks like we're being weak when we ask for help, but I feel like it requires a lot of courage, a lot of strength to actually sit down and say, okay, now I need help. So that is part of strength. So learn to be kind with yourself, be patient, and regain your strength by asking for help. Yeah, that would be my parting shot.
Thank you so much, Nassim, for that. Thank you for putting it in a very simple way. If your best friend was going through that, how would you respond to it? I think that stuck with me. So thank you so much, Nassim, for that. Finally, over to you, Ian.
Stressors are part of life. We all go through stressors, either eustress or distress. So for us to have enough coping mechanisms in our toolbox, we need to try things out. So don't be afraid to try things out, or having the fear of failure. And that can include seeking professional help. Don't be afraid. Yes.
And we're coming to the end of the conversation, but you've brought something else up. Just clarify to our audience, what is eustress and distress as we conclude?
So when it comes to stress, we have two types of stress. We have the eustress and the distress. Eustress is positive stress. For example, if you are planning an event, let's say a wedding, and you don't know how many people to expect, it's going to stress you out, when it comes to planning. So that's positive stress because you're trying to plan out something positive. Distress is the negative stress. Let's say, for example, having um, financial issues or relationship issues or being burnt out. Yeah. So stress is positive stress. Distress is negative stress.
Thank you so much for that. Regardless of the form of stress, whether positive or negative, it's all part of life, and we all need to find a way to cope positively with it. One thing that has been consistent throughout the panel is the aspect of seeking help, which I really appreciate. It's a common experience. I hear that I'm the strong one in our family, I'm the strong one in my friend group. I'm a man, or I'm the first one. I'm supposed to be there for everyone, and that keeps you from seeking help from a very early point in your life. I like to use this analogy, and please allow me to give it. Two figures: Samson from the Bible, if this is familiar to you, very strong warrior. I want to assume. Was known all over for his military prowess. And at the same time, we have another figure, mythical figure, if I would say, Luanda Magere from the Luo folklore. And Luanda Magere was also a very strong warrior known for his prowess. Two very strong figures from different parts, from different contexts actually, but they both had one thing in common. They both had vulnerabilities. And I want to highlight that even the strongest ones in our communities, in our spaces, also have vulnerabilities. And in that way, we all need some form of help, one way or another. So I want to bring this conversation to an end with that example. And I'd like to especially appreciate all of our panelists for their great insights on this topic. Please feel free to share this conversation, feel free to engage with us, as well as let us know what other topics you'd like us to talk about. Stay in tune to all the other topics that we have lined up for you. Next week we'll be talking about neurodivergence, and we welcome you to actually come and learn what this concept of neurodivergence is about. That is all to our beautiful audience. Thank you all, and have a good rest of the day.
Have a good one.
Bye bye.